Well, welcome to Facebook Live with Mark and Lisa Scandrette this morning. I'm really excited to talk to them about their adventures over the summer. And I know many of you are too, because I think I've had more people ask me about this Facebook Live session than ever before. So welcome, Lisa and Mark.
We're glad to chat with you.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. And let's just start by saying that Mark came back with COVID, so which he then passed on to Lisa. So they are still struggling with COVID a little bit. So I'm very grateful that they're well enough to talk to us this morning. But if you see them coughing and spluttering or something, just offer up a prayer for them in their recovery from this illness that so many, of course, have struggled with over the last few years. But it's a delight. Mark and Lisa have been friends for many years. And I think some of you know, Mark is a prolific writer of books. This is his latest one, The Ninefold Path of Jesus. And this is my favorite one. I'm sorry, but it is Practicing the Way of Jesus. And then Mark and Lisa also wrote a book together called Belonging and Becoming, but unfortunately I couldn't find my copy of that, but we'll make sure that it gets to be in the links. And also, let me just say, I have it open here on my phone so that if anybody has any comments or questions to ask, you can put them here on the post on God Face Light, and we will pass the comments and questions on to Mark and Lisa. Luis Fernando Batista says, hello, guys. So,
yeah.
isn't that great? I love, how with something like this, we get people from all over the place, all over the world.
Yeah, I still haven't gotten to Brazil. I'd love to be there sometime.
It's many years since I've been there. And I'd love to go back. It's an incredible place. So, but anyway, today we're going to focus on talking about pilgrimage. And both Mark and Lisa did pilgrimages over the summer, but they did different pilgrimages. So I want to start, and as you can see, they're in different bedrooms at the moment. So I wanted to start by saying that they are not separated. They are in the same house.
We really still like each other.
And there are reasons that they did separate pilgrimages. So can you just tell us a little bit about why you did separate pilgrimages?
Do you want to take that one or should I?
I think it's yours.
All right. Well, I know that Mark has long wanted to do the Camino. He's talked about it for years. And the opportunity came up this year because he was traveling with a group of men over a number of months, doing some processing together and going through kind of a learning lab together. And at the end, they were all going to walk the Camino for a week. And Mark wanted to do it the whole time. And we are managing a sabbatical for the first time in way too long. So Wonderful. This became part of Mark's sabbatical. However, Mark is a walker and would love to walk 20 miles a day.
Every day for the rest of my life.
I like to walk, but that sounded a bit too much and too long. And I found out that at the same time, there was an event that was on my, I've always wanted to do list happening up in Shetland called Shetland Wool Week. So we decided that we would start out together in Scotland. And at some point, Mark went to walk the Camino, and I did St. Cuthberts Way and followed by a trip to Shetland. So Wonderful. We both had our separate adventures and are still kind of catching up on the good stuff together that came out of our adventures.
And then I walked the Portuguese Camino from Lisbon to Santiago.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was a little confused because I'd always tend to think of the Camino de Santiago as being in Spain, and then you said it was in Portugal, and so I had to look it up to see.
Well, I started in Portugal, and you still end up in Spain in Santiago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how many days walk was it, Mark?
So for me, it was 25 days of walking.
Wow.
With a few rest days in there. So about 32 days altogether.
It's so funny when I hear people walking the Camino, I always think of the film The Way, and how Martin Sheen, with no preparation at all, just strides out and effortlessly walks the Camino. How realistic is that, Mark?
Well, I'm an avid walker, and I still did some training in July. I took a couple of weeks just to see if my body could handle walking 20 miles a day for 7 or 8 days at a time, and needed to work that out. And so some people try it without any preparation, and I think they get some blisters and have a bit of a rough time of it.
Mm-hmm. We had some good friends that walked it from Australia, and talking about walking together, they started a couple with starting to walk together, but he's like 6'3", great long legs, and she's like 5'2" or something, and very short legs, and they very quickly realized that they just couldn't walk together. Even though both of them loved walking, they just couldn't walk together.
Yeah.
And so they would plan spots where they would meet up along the way. It was interesting. But
yeah.
What was the longest? How far did you walk total then?
I haven't exactly calculated it, but something like 400 miles.
400 miles. That's great.
Yeah.
And what was the highlight? Or I'm sure there are so many highlights, but what would you think of as?
Yeah. I mean, it was wonderful to have such an extended period of solitude, and having that daily rhythm of just waking up, packing the pack, and starting to walk, and then taking a couple of breaks during the day, and then arriving at the next place, quickly washing your clothes because you're only carrying 2 sets of clothes, one on your back and one spare, and then getting some food or taking a nap. And so that was, just luxurious to have that much time and solitude. Was terrific. And seeing, I walk a lot, but to walk somewhere new and somewhere where I'm going somewhere was pretty exciting. And then probably the big surprise to me was the amazing conversations that I would have with other pilgrims along the way. The Camino, just a lot of people are in a search or seeking that are on the Camino and are ready to talk about big questions in life and where they're going. So that was fun.
Now, a question from Tom. Did you listen to audiobooks on the way?
I did listen to some audiobooks, partly because I had a rhythm of the day where I'd spend the first 2 or 3 hours in silence. And then honestly, I was really humbled by the trail, because I do think of myself as this incredible walker. But the first day on the trail, I had not prepared for walking on uneven terrain or cobblestones. And I also hadn't planned out where I was going to stay that night. And the town I planned to arrive in had no accommodation. So I had to hike 35 miles the first day, 56 kilometers in the rain. And by the end of the day, my feet were covered in blisters. So for about the first week, I'm just trying to do pain management as I'm walking on the trail. Not a lot of big insights. It's mostly like, can I put one more foot before the other? And how am I going to find a place to stay? And where are those yellow arrows pointing me? Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, well, let's move to Lisa. Lisa, tell us a little about the walk that you did, St. Cuthbert's Way.
Yeah, so I did St. Cuthbert's Way from Melrose to Lindisfarne.
Tell us where Melrose is, because that's not a name most people.
Melrose is a town in the Scottish borders, and it is where St. Cuthbert first took his vows, and
Melrose Abbey, yeah,
served in the monastery. And so it's not a large town. I'm not surprised people haven't heard of it, because I hadn't either. But it's where you begin St. Cuthbert's Way. And St. Cuthbert's Way goes up over quite a few ridges of, I don't know if you'd call them mountains or high hills. In Scotland, they call them mountains. They're big, and kind of through moorland and heath and some forest. It's a very varied path. And you wind up on Lindisfarne, which is a tidal island that you can only access during low tide. So,
and how many miles did you walk?
Well, officially it says 62 and a half. My pedometer says longer, so I don't know who was more accurate, but we'll call it 62 and a half miles. And I trained for it too. Before I left, I was walking 8 miles a day, but most of the time I walked closer to 12 miles a day on the trail. And like Mark, I found that, training walking in a city is really different than hiking on a trail. Yes. But I really enjoyed being out in nature, seeing just seeing the beauty of the heather and the rivers and the sheep and just the varied terrain.
Was the heather in bloom?
It was just past, so you could see some of it. And it had kind of a brownish purple cast to it now, because it was just past. So some of the flowers were dying off, but I was still intrigued by just hills and hills of heather. And I could imagine what it was like when they were bright purple. So
we one time we were in Scotland, and we drove all the way across the Highlands there, and they were in bright purple. It was quite amazing. It
yes.
Really, yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah. And I think for me too, having the space with thoughts to myself and being out in nature, and just having that time to reflect was really good. I think overall, with both parts of my pilgrimage, the thing that's really standing out to me is just the hospitality, the gifts of receiving things from others, which was at times humbling. We had friends who had organized my St. Cuthbert's Way for me and took quite a bit of time out of their lives to, they had set up accommodations for me and would drive me to the beginning of my trail every day, because St. Cuthbert's Way is a little different than the Camino in that there isn't lots of accommodation right along the way. There is, but my friends had a friend who owned a house not far from the way. And so they would just drive me to the starting point every day and then back to the house in the evening. And so I was really humbled by their graciousness and their hospitality to facilitate that for me. But there were so many other things, people I met along the way that we journeyed with for a little while together, and both there and in Shetland, that I think that receiving hospitality is sometimes more difficult for me than giving it. And it was a very good discipline for me to just openly receive.
Tell us a bit about walking across the causeway.
Oh, walking across the causeway was so much fun. So there's like I said before, you can only walk across at low tide. And for those of you who are not familiar, even cars can't drive across when the tide is not low. So the island is really cut off at high tide. So we waited. The last day that you hike, you pretty much just start and do the causeway. Like I think we started 2 miles before the causeway, but that's what you're going to do that day because you have to time it right. You want to, if you're walking across the sands, you want to get across kind of at the peak of low tide. You don't want to wait until the tide starts coming back in.
Because it is I mean, people have died.
Yeah, and there's little huts along the way up on stilts so that if you get caught, you can climb up there and wait to be rescued, which I looked at those little huts. I don't know if I'd want to trust them to the North Sea, but so we started about a half an hour after the low tide, the safe crossing time, so that the sands were fairly dry. And you're encouraged to take your shoes off and to walk barefoot, which I love walking barefoot, but I began to see that this is also very practical because sometimes the sand was hard packed and easy to walk on. Sometimes the sand was really slippery and it was like you were ice skating across and you had to be really careful. And sometimes it was really mucky and your feet would sink down into the mud, like up to your ankles. And so, so I found that very quickly I had to turn on sort of my child brain and decide, oh, we're having fun and we're getting messy today. Because if you don't do that, I think it could be a really, I don't know, if you can't find that playful space, I think that a person could get really frustrated with that experience. But I ran into a brother and sister who were just a little bit older than me, who liked to do pilgrim paths together. Mm. And I'd run into them a few days before. We walked over some of the most difficult hills. And then we ran into each other for the crossing. And they were perfect partners because they were also able to enter into the wonder of, you know, tromping through the mud and laughing when we slipped and all of that kind of thing. And we just had a wonderful time. And the whole time we were crossing, I thought, this is such a unique experience. I don't think I've ever experienced anything like this. It was just wonderful.
It's one of those, I mean, I would love to walk, at least to do that part of St. Cuthbert's Way. But it's interesting, as we were talking about earlier, that, you know, not only have you done St. Cuthbert's Way, but our good friend David Pott is somebody else who's just done it. And, you know, there are a couple of posts on Godspace about his experience because they will work, well, they didn't actually walk with the coffin in the end, but they had a replica of St. Cuthbert's coffin that they were going to be walking with. The reason they didn't walk with it in the end was it was the week that the Queen died. And they didn't want to kind of feel taking away from that, you know, or having to explain all the time that this wasn't a replica of the Queen's coffin. It was, you know, something different. But
we must have been there very close to the same time because I was on Lindisfarne the Monday of the Queen's funeral.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it would have been almost exactly the same time. But how long were you on Lindisfarne then?
I just spent one night.
Okay. And then you went up to Shetland.
Yes. And that was its own pilgrimage. I took the train from Edinburgh to Aberdeen. And then I took the overnight ferry for 14 hours into the North Sea to Shetland.
Wonderful.
And I was interested in going to Shetland because of their rich history of knitting and sheep and farming. And I just knew that they had such an embedded history of those things. And I wanted to see and experience it. And the time I went is called Shetland Wool Week. And there's so much on offer that week that can give you access to people who have spent their lives doing those things. So farm tours and talks and lessons in knitting and spinning, and
wonderful.
And there's people from all over the world there. So
okay. Yeah,
that too was just a wonderful experience. I continued to do some hiking to discover parts of Shetland, and just met the most wonderful people, and again experienced some real hospitality.
Well, hospitality is, I think, in some ways a part of a pilgrim experience, isn't it? Wherever you are.
Yes.
I think I presume, Mark, that you experienced hospitality along the way too.
Yeah, a lot of times, even just among the pilgrims, people sharing an apple with you, or you run out of water and they give you some of theirs. A few of the hostels we stayed in had kitchens. And so one night, an Italian fella said he wanted to make us all a great dinner. And so we had bottles of wine and pasta and salad, and had a great night enjoying each other's company. Not everybody even speaking common languages. Yep. So you'd have, but still finding ways to connect.
What a special experience. Tell us what it was like getting to Santiago too.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of strangely moving. I'm not one to I don't like to force sentimentality about things. And so I was not trying to get anything, any feeling going, but I started to feel something, and walked into and it suddenly got very crowded. There was a festival going on. So I'm trying to complete my 20 miles of hiking, and all these other people are just milling about. And that was kind of frustrating. And I had to fight my way through the crowd to get to the cathedral. And then in that cathedral square, there's hundreds and hundreds of people who've just completed their pilgrimage on one of the Camino routes. And so they're elated and relieved and excited. And sometimes there's family or friends who arrived earlier to greet you and welcome you. And a few of our party had arrived earlier and filmed us coming into the square and stuff. So it was really wonderful. And then the group I was with, we, this was part of I hiked for 17 days by myself, and then met up with a group that John Huckins and I were leading together over an 8-month process of facing midlife and as leaders, and also asking bigger questions about what's the role of a white male in an intersectional world, and how do we really listen and learn from patriarchy and racism, and find a more humble posture in the world. So we'd been journeying together for 7 months before we hiked, and then coming together for those 9 days on the trail was really quite, a lot of great lifelong friendships developing, and going deep with one another in our journeys. So it was really special to get into Santiago together. And we did a bit of our own ritual in the square that evening, where we talked about, we picked up something on the trail that represented our first half of life that we were wanting to lay down for the next part of our journeys. And John had us, after telling what our thing that we were going to lay down was, our offering, we'd walk up to, we were lined up in 2 rows, and on one side you'd walk over, and a guy would say, "You're loved." And then you'd walk to the other side and someone would say, "Welcome home." And then you go back and forth, "You're loved, welcome home." So it was a really meaningful way to end our Camino time.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's lovely. And Lisa, Lindisfarne, I know Lindisfarne is a special place. Was it special for you, or?
Yeah, it was interesting because I when I originally planned this trip, the Shetland part was the main event. And then I kind of added this in as a way to do something else. But as I was doing it, it became more and more meaningful. And so for me, Lindisfarne, I stayed there by myself, and I had a good 24 hours of solitude. And I have a friend who had just published a virtual pilgrimage to Lindisfarne.
Oh, okay.
She is a spiritual director or spiritual companion. And so it had just come into my inbox via her newsletter. And so I took her virtual guide, and the second day I was there, I hiked around and had a retreat with it.
Oh, lovely.
Because it was full of prompts and prayers and questions and so on. And so it was like being there with my friend.
Is there a possibility of putting a link to that in the comments, or is it just in a newsletter that's not possible?
I don't know. Let me look around a little bit.
Yeah,
I have a copy of it here, but I could definitely link to Fiona's work because she does a lot.
I mean more.
So I can send you a link to, or I can comment on this.
Well, and
it works best.
Lisa bought for me on Lindisfarne this lovely little book on doodling with some of the beautiful illustrations by Mary Fleeson, another person that I think everybody needs to be aware of on Lindisfarne, because she does these incredible, well, she calls them doodles. I would call them pieces of art, and many of them very much based on the Book of Kells and some of the Celtic kind of artwork.
I bought some cards that have some of her artwork beautiful. On, and they're kind of like illuminated manuscripts made modern. So her shop's called the Lindisfarne Scriptorium.
Yeah, I've looked at it and drooled over a lot of the things on a number of occasions, I know. So what about on Shetland? What was the highlight of your time there?
I think for me, if I had to sum it up in one thing, I think what I experienced is the joy of being me and the freedom to play with that. Things that I've long been true about me. Like, I love being out in nature ever since I was a child. I love making things. And I just felt invited to really unreservedly enjoy those things for the time that I was in Shetland. And then I met other people who were doing the same.
Beautiful.
And so to me, those are both very holy places. Being out in nature, and then creating from things that God has made. To me, the creation or the knitting, the spinning, it's all just an extension of enjoying God's creation. And so
feeling too,
I just felt the invitation to fully immerse in those things for those days.
Beautiful.
And I just felt really alive and myself in that.
Wonderful. Mark, any last things that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, well, I was fascinated by the history of pilgrimage. And, originally Christians would try to get to Jerusalem. And when that became not possible, after a period of time, people started traveling to Santiago, where the bones of the son of Boanerges, the son of thunder, was who was an apostle to Spain. And so I think some of the elements of pilgrimage that seem to make it special, one would be having that, just taking the time out of the normal patterns of life and entering into this sort of liminal space openness, where you're out of your normal environment, you're meeting other people, you're discovering a new place. And it does something, I think, to free up your mind and to allow you to think deeper thoughts of your creator and your purpose and the meaning of life, and then the companions you meet along the way. And so I was concerned that maybe is pilgrimage just something for the privileged, but obviously it takes some amount of funds to get to a place like Spain or Portugal to start the journey. I think a person could do it for between $20 and $30 a day if they were being careful about it. Maybe closer to 20 if you were really shrewd about where you stayed and how you access food and things like that. Lisa and I just both wrote kind of intentions or meditations on our journey. I know that was one of the most meaningful things to me. Was one morning I woke up really early and started on the trail before it was light. And I don't always have these creative streaks of inspiration, but something was working that morning. And I wanted to write down something that I used the rest of the Camino to set my intentions for the day. And I continue to use it now. And it goes like this. Watch the sunrise, walk in the light of divine presence, want, love, joy, peace, mercy, and justice. Seek wisdom, tell the truth, create beauty, love courageously. Watch the sun set, die to the small separated self. Eat and drink, laugh and cry, listen and tell stories with a grateful, undivided heart.
Beautiful.
Sleep in peace. Dream of a new world. Awaken to the eternal.
Lovely. Oh, I love that, Mark. That's great. That's really good.
And it's what I want, and I got to see the sunrise and the sunset almost every day. And I thought if I was living right, I'd see more sunrises and sunsets.
Interesting. What about you, Lisa? Any last thoughts that you'd like to share with people?
Well, I would echo that what surprised me most was the openness that I felt while on pilgrimage. And I think that being open in a different way allows for God to surprise us with things about ourselves, things about others, and to listen to his voice in a different way. I could share my blessing as well as a way to close.
It's a great way to close.
May you connect deeply with this place as you journey. May those who come before you inspire you to continue their best work and longings. May you know strength and agency in your body, your legs, your hands, your mind, your heart. May spaciousness fill your heart, soul, and mind. May God be in every step, every creature, every piece of wool that runs through your fingers. May you hear God's invitational whisper each day in the wind, waves, and jubilations of birds. May you recognize the face of God in your fellow travelers, hosts, passers-by, new friends. May your hands be open to give and receive the abundance this day offers. May you create quiet to sit, to settle, to notice, to reflect, to contemplate. May you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. Experience the hospitality of God at each turn. May you find companionship with yourself, emerging stronger, more beautiful, more truly you. Maybe you have courage to explore your curiosity and engage in the new and the unknown. May you clothe yourself in beauty. May you revel in the connection of co-creation, mindful of the thread that leads you back to the source of all things.
Beautiful. Oh, both of you. Very, very beautiful. In fact, David Pott asked if he can get a copy of those special words. And I was wondering, the best thing is if you're open to this, if you can either do a post on the God Space Light community in the group. I presume you're both members of it, so that people can see those words, or else put it in the comments, either one.
Yeah, I can do that.
Great, yeah. And then Andy Wade says hi. He says some of his favorite people. So,
hey.
So, well, thank you. This has been so interesting. I mean, we could probably go on for another hour talking about this, but thank you for sharing. It was really, I found it inspirational, and I'm sure everybody that watches this will find it inspirational as well. So thank you very, very much for taking this time. And we pray for your full healing over the next few days. But I'm impressed that neither of you coughed or had to blow your nose in the middle of it. So that's great.
Well, I think it's coming. Recovery isn't quick, but it's coming.
Christine, one final thought. I think your pilgrimage starts when you decide to go. So every walk I was on over the summer after I decided to go, if I walked with somebody else, I'd say, thanks for joining me on my pilgrimage.
Lovely. Yep.
And it was something, so that there's something that kind of was at work in me, knowing what I was preparing for. And I think it's, Lisa and I've talked about this. It's often good for us to have something like a trip like this planned that gives us something to kind of look towards and set our hearts on.
It's interesting. Lisa gave me this beautiful hand knitted labyrinth as a memento of her journey. And I don't know whether you guys know, but finger labyrinths often featured on churches way back to as far as the 3rd century. And they think that people would trace them as a form of pilgrimage. People that couldn't go on pilgrimage, and some of the big ones too, people that couldn't go on pilgrimage because it was an expensive business, of course, in the Middle Ages, that they would, either walking a finger labyrinth or walking a labyrinth was a form of pilgrimage as well. And so every time you use one, Lisa, you can think you're another stage of your pilgrimage. Yeah. And Mark, as you continue to walk, another step, more steps in your pilgrimage.
Yeah. So, blessed are those who have set their hearts on pilgrimage.
Exactly. Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
All the best. Peace.
Thank you, Christine.